The room has already been quiet for hours when you first begin to notice the rain. Not the beginning of the rain, that happened long before you arrived, but the steady presence of it against the tall windows that line the far wall of the operations floor. The sound blends with the soft electrical hum of equipment and the faint, intermittent murmur of voices somewhere behind the glass partition. You sit at the edge of a long table that feels older than the building itself, its wooden surface polished smooth by years of elbows, notebooks, and careful hands. A small desk lamp pools warm light over the pages in front of you, though you have not written anything for some time now. Your pen rests between your fingers, its weight familiar but idle. This is your first night assigned to support duty. No one announced it when you arrived. No one needed to. The shift supervisor simply gestured toward the empty chair near the end of the table and slid a yellow notepad across the surface toward you. That was hours ago now. Since then, the room has remained mostly the same, steady, unhurried, wrapped in a calm that seems practiced rather than accidental. Across the room, a few other lamps glow over scattered desks. Their light falls in soft circles on papers, mugs, and hands that occasionally move to adjust a page or jot a note. Most of the people here speak quietly, if they speak at all. You had imagined something different before tonight. Not dramatic, exactly. You are not someone who expected flashing lights or raised voices, but perhaps a little more movement. A sense of urgency humming beneath the surface. Instead, the atmosphere feels almost contemplative. Someone near the far wall slowly turns a page of a folder. A chair shifts slightly as a colleague leans back, stretching their shoulders. The rain continues its steady conversation with the glass. You glance down at your notebook again, though there is nothing written there yet except your name in the upper corner. You wrote it early in the evening out of habit, the way you always begin a new pad. The ink has dried. Your pen hovers over the page for a moment, then settles back into stillness. From where you sit, you can see into the smaller room beyond the glass partition. The lights are dimmer there, softer somehow. Two people sit at a narrow desk inside, both leaning slightly forward as they listen through a headset resting between them. You cannot hear what they hear, only the quiet murmur of their voices when they occasionally respond. Their tone never changes very much. Calm, even, patient. The first lesson of this work, you are beginning to understand, is that most of it happens in quiet rooms like this one, not in the places people imagine. Your training covered many things: long lectures, careful discussions, thoughtful exercises designed to prepare you for emotional terrain rather than physical challenges. But no classroom quite captured this feeling, the stillness of it, the long waiting, the sense that hours can pass with almost nothing happening at all. Someone walks behind you, their footsteps softened by the carpet. A faint scent of coffee drifts through the air as they pass, followed by the gentle clink of a mug being set down somewhere near the back wall. You glance up. The supervisor stands beside a narrow counter, pouring hot water into a ceramic cup that has clearly seen many nights like this one. Steam curls slowly upward, briefly visible in the glow of the nearby lamp. They notice you watching and offer a small, tired smile. Not the kind that invites conversation, just the kind that acknowledges another person sharing the room. You return the smile and lower your gaze again. Your job tonight is simple. Observe, listen, take notes if needed, stay present. The instructions were given earlier in the evening in the same quiet tone that seems to govern everything here. This work begins long before anyone speaks, the supervisor said while handing you the notepad. Most of what you'll learn happens in the waiting. At the time, the words sounded almost philosophical. Now, hours later, they feel literal. The rain softens for a moment, then resumes with gentle persistence. You notice details you might have missed earlier in the night. The way the desk lamps cast overlapping circles of light across the table. The faint scratch of a pen somewhere behind you. The slow ticking of a wall clock that no one seems to look at anymore. Time behaves differently in rooms like this. Not slower exactly, just less important. A chair across the room creaks as someone shifts their weight. Another voice murmurs behind the glass. You glance up again. Inside the smaller room, one of the negotiators writes something on a sheet of paper, then slides it across to their colleague. The second person nods almost imperceptibly before speaking again into the headset. You cannot hear the words, only the rhythm of them, measured, unhurried, like someone carefully placing stones across a shallow stream. Your pen finally moves, not because anything dramatic has happened, but because something small has settled into place inside your understanding. You write one sentence. The work is quieter than people think. You pause, reading the line back to yourself, then add another beneath it. And it begins long before anyone speaks. The ink glistens briefly before drying. Your handwriting looks smaller tonight than usual, as though the room itself encourages restraint. Behind the glass, the negotiator leans back slightly, stretching their neck before returning to the headset. Their voice remains steady. You wonder how long they have been sitting there. Probably longer than you. Probably many nights before this one. The thought does not feel intimidating. Not exactly. More like standing at the beginning of a long path you have chosen to walk. You remember the first time you considered this work. It was not during a moment of crisis, not during some dramatic event that suddenly inspired you. It happened in a quiet lecture hall late one afternoon while a visiting professional described the reality of the role in simple terms. You spend a lot of time listening, they said, and sometimes the most important thing you offer is patience. Those words stayed with you, not because they sounded heroic, but because they sounded honest. Another hour passes, or perhaps two. The rain begins to fade into a softer drizzle, though the windows remain dark mirrors reflecting the lamps and desks behind you. Someone turns on a small radio at very low volume near the back of the room. Not music, just a channel that occasionally murmurs with distant voices and soft static. Muted. Controlled. The supervisor walks past again and pauses near your chair. "Doing all right?" they ask quietly. You nod. Yes. It is the truth. There is a calm settling over you that you did not expect. Not excitement, not tension. Something steadier. They glance at your notepad, though they do not lean close enough to read it. First nights are mostly about learning how the room breathes, they say. You like that description. The room breathes, slowly, almost invisibly, but steadily. You watch as they move toward the glass partition, exchanging a few quiet words with the team inside before returning to the main table. No one raises their voice. No one rushes. The night continues unfolding at its own deliberate pace. Your tea, which someone quietly placed beside you earlier, has cooled to the point where steam no longer rises from the cup. You take a slow sip anyway. It tastes faintly of mint. Warm, but no longer hot. Somewhere down the hallway outside this room, a door closes softly. The sound echoes briefly through the empty corridors of the building before fading. You imagine the rest of the structure mostly asleep now. Offices dark, hallways silent. Only a handful of rooms still glowing with light like this one. Places where people remain awake simply to be present. You shift slightly in your chair, rolling your shoulders as the hours accumulate gently in your muscles. No one seems tired exactly, just settled. Experienced professionals carry themselves with a kind of quiet endurance you are beginning to recognize. They do not resist the length of the night. They accept it. A few more lines appear in your notebook. Listening is a form of work. Silence is not empty. The rain stops completely. Outside the windows, the darkness feels a shade lighter than before, though dawn is still a distant idea. Behind the glass, the negotiator continues speaking in the same calm tone that has filled the room all night. Patient, measured, steady. And you sit at the edge of the table beneath the soft glow of the lamp, pen resting lightly against the paper, realizing that this work begins not with dramatic moments, but with quiet ones, with long nights, with listening, with learning how to remain steady while the world outside the room slowly turns toward morning. The building is quieter on the nights when you arrive earlier. The corridors outside the operations room stretch long and dim beneath overhead lights that hum softly above polished floors. Most of the offices along the hallway are dark by the time you pass them, their doors closed, their desks inside resting in patient stillness until morning returns. Your footsteps echo lightly as you walk. Not loudly, never loudly in buildings like this, but enough to remind you how empty the upper floors become after sunset. When you reach the operations room, the door is already slightly open. A thin line of warm light spills across the hallway carpet. Inside, the lamps are on. They are almost always on before anyone else arrives, as though the room itself prefers not to sit in darkness for long. You step inside and close the door gently behind you.
The long table waits in the center of the room. Its familiar arrangement of notebooks, folders, and scattered pens already forming quiet islands beneath the desk lamps. Someone has set out fresh pads of paper near each chair, the crisp pages faintly catching the glow of the light. The rain has not come tonight. Instead, the windows reflect the deep blue of early evening, the sky outside slowly settling into night. You set your coat over the back of your chair and place your notebook on the table. This is no longer your first night. It has been many weeks since you sat at the far end of the table with a blank page and an uncertain pen. The rhythm of these rooms has become something you recognize now, not fully mastered, but familiar enough that your shoulders settle a little more easily when you sit down. Across the room, the supervisor is already pouring tea into 2 small ceramic cups. Steam rises slowly in the quiet air. Evening, they say. Evening. You take the seat closer to the center of the table now. No one instructed you to move. It simply happened gradually over time, the way chairs in rooms like this shift subtly as people grow into their roles. The edge of the room still feels comfortable, but you no longer belong entirely there. The first voices arrive shortly after. One negotiator enters carrying a thin folder tucked beneath their arm, offering a quiet greeting before settling into the chair beside the glass partition. Another arrives moments later, shrugging off a coat and setting down a mug that smells faintly of coffee and cinnamon. Their movements are calm, unhurried. The atmosphere gathers itself slowly, like a long breath filling the room. You open your notebook and turn to a fresh page. The soft scratch of paper moving beneath your hand is one of the first sounds of the evening. For a few minutes, no one speaks. The building outside continues settling into nighttime silence. Then the supervisor clears their throat softly and begins the evening briefing. Not loudly, never loudly, just enough to carry across the table. The conversation that follows is calm and thoughtful, more reflective than urgent. Information passes across the table in quiet sentences, accompanied by the occasional nod or thoughtful pause. You listen closely. That is still the foundation of your work. But now, occasionally, you speak. A small observation, a clarification, a question asked carefully after waiting for the right moment. No one rushes to answer. Responses arrive slowly, considered before they are offered. And you realize that the room values that pace, the steadiness of it, the absence of haste. When the discussion ends, the supervisor turns slightly toward you. "Tonight you'll sit inside," they say gently. The words are simple, but you feel their weight settle quietly across your shoulders. Inside, the smaller room beyond the glass. You nod once. Your notebook closes softly. The negotiator, already seated inside the room, glances up and offers a reassuring half-smile as you enter. The space feels smaller than it looked from the outside. 2 chairs, a narrow desk, and the soft glow of a lamp that illuminates the papers spread across its surface. A headset rests between the chairs. You take the empty seat beside them. From here, the sounds of the main room fade slightly, replaced by the faint murmur of the communication line resting quietly in the headset. Not constant speech, just occasional breaths of sound. The negotiator beside you adjusts a sheet of notes, then leans back slightly. "You'll listen tonight," they say. Their voice carries the same calm tone you've heard so many times through the glass. Same as always. You nod. Listening is still the work. But now you are closer to it. The headset is placed gently over your ears. At first, the sound feels almost too quiet. Just the soft presence of another person's breathing somewhere far away, carried across wires and circuits into this small, warm room. You say nothing. Minutes pass. The negotiator beside you makes a small note on the paper in front of them, the pen scratching softly in the stillness. Then, eventually, they speak. Their voice remains calm, measured, gentle. You cannot hear the other side clearly enough to understand every word, but you can hear the pauses, the spaces between sentences, and you begin to notice how important those spaces are. Silence is not something they hurry to fill. Sometimes it stretches for long seconds, sometimes longer. The negotiator simply waits, listening, allowing the quiet to exist. Your hand moves across the notebook slowly. Not many words, just small observations. Pacing calm. Long pauses allowed, tone steady. Inside the smaller room, the air feels slightly warmer than the main floor. The desk lamp here glows with a softer shade of light, casting long shadows across the notes scattered in careful stacks. You settle into the chair. The headset rests where it always does. Your hands move with quiet familiarity as you adjust the microphone and open your notebook to a fresh page. You no longer hesitate before writing the date. The pen moves easily. Outside the glass, the rest of the team arranges themselves around the table. You can see them through the reflection of the lamps. Silhouettes leaning forward, pages turning, mugs lifted in slow sips. The rain thickens against the windows. The call arrives not long after. The line hums softly through the headset, a distant connection forming somewhere beyond the quiet walls of this room. You listen first, as you always do, letting the other voice settle into the space before you begin to speak. Your voice has changed since your first nights here. Not in sound, perhaps, but in weight. It carries less uncertainty, more patience. You no longer rush to fill pauses. You let silence breathe. A few years ago, that silence would have felt uncomfortable, like an empty space that needed filling. Now it feels like part of the conversation itself, an unseen partner that moves gently between sentences. Your pen moves slowly across the page, a few short lines, observations. Not every word matters, but the tone always does. The negotiator sitting beside you tonight is newer to the room than you are. They listen carefully, their posture attentive but slightly tense in the way that first years often bring. You remember that feeling well. Halfway through the conversation, you slide a small note across the desk toward them. It contains only 2 words. Let it breathe. They glance at the note, then back at you. You offer a small nod. The room settles again. The rain continues its patient tapping against the windows outside, and somewhere beyond the glass wall the supervisor leans back slightly in their chair, watching the slow rhythm of the call unfold. Hours pass the way they always do here, not dramatically, not with sudden shifts of energy, but in quiet stretches of listening, speaking and waiting. Tea grows cold. Pens scratch softly. The wall clock turns another hour forward. Your voice moves gently through the headset. You do not think much about what you are saying now. The words arrive naturally, shaped by the long accumulation of nights like this one. Presence has become instinct. At one point, the line falls silent for nearly a full minute. You do not rush to fill it. Instead, you look down at your notes, letting your breathing remain slow and steady. Across the desk, the junior negotiator watches you carefully. You know they are measuring the silence, learning its shape. Eventually, the other voice returns, and the conversation continues as if the quiet had simply been another sentence. Later, during a break in the call, the supervisor taps lightly on the glass and slides a small paper through the slot. You glance down. Just one line written in calm handwriting. Good pacing. You smile slightly and set the paper beside your notebook. These notes used to feel like evaluations. Now, they feel more like quiet encouragements shared between colleagues who understand the length of the road you are all walking together. The rain fades sometime after midnight. By then, the room has settled into its deepest stillness. The building outside has gone completely silent. Even the hallway lights seem dimmer somehow, their hum softened by the hour. Inside the negotiation room, the lamp casts its warm pool of light across the desk. Your notebook is now half full. Small observations fill the pages, not dramatic insights, just careful reminders of tone, timing, and the emotional currents that pass beneath spoken words. You have learned that most of the work lives there, in the currents beneath the sentences. The junior negotiator eventually takes the headset for a short stretch of conversation. You lean back slightly, letting them speak while you observe. Their voice carries the same careful calm you once practiced during your early nights. It is steady, though you can hear the faint effort beneath it. The quiet concentration required to remain present for long stretches of uncertainty. You watch the way they breathe between sentences, the way they glance occasionally at the notes on the desk. You remember doing the same. When they finish, they hand the headset back with a quiet exhale. You accept it without comment, letting the conversation continue its slow path forward. Outside the glass, someone refills the kettle. Steam curls upward again. The night deepens. At some point, you realize you have stopped thinking about time altogether. The hours move without weight now, passing like clouds across a dark sky. You focus only on the voice in your ear, on the quiet room around you, on the steady rhythm of breath and patience that carries the conversation forward. When the call finally ends, the first faint color of morning has begun to touch the windows. Not bright yet, just a pale softness spreading slowly across the sky. You remove the headset and rub your eyes gently. Across the desk, the junior negotiator stretches their hands. That was long, they say softly. You smile. Yes. They hesitate a moment. How do you stay calm through all that silence? You think for a moment before answering. The rain has returned again outside, lighter this time, barely more than mist on the glass. Finally, you say, you stop thinking of it as silence. They tilt their heads slightly. What do you mean? You glance down at your notebook, at the quiet lines filling the page. It's part of the conversation, you say. Sometimes the most important part. They nod slowly. The room beyond the glass begins to stir as the rest of the team gathers their papers. Chairs shift. Lamps click off one by one. The supervisor opens the door and steps inside. Good work tonight, they say. The words settle into the room like the final note of a long song. You close your notebook and stand. Outside, the hallway windows now carry the pale gray light of early morning. The building is beginning to wake again. Distant footsteps echo faintly somewhere below, and the first quiet sounds of daytime offices preparing to open drift upward through the floors. Another night has passed. Another long conversation carried carefully through the dark. As you walk down the hallway toward the exit, your shoulders feel tired but steady. Experience, you have learned, is not about knowing exactly what will happen. It is about trusting your ability to remain present when nothing happens at all, and trusting the quiet. By the time you begin guiding others, you notice something subtle about the room. It listens to you. Not in the way people imagine leadership. There are no speeches, no declarations, no moment where everyone suddenly turns toward you expecting direction. The shift is quieter than that. It appears in small glances, in the way someone pauses before speaking and looks briefly in your direction, in the way notes begin arriving at your side of the table first before they travel anywhere else. Responsibility, like everything in this profession, grows gradually. You notice it most on nights when the building feels especially still. Tonight is one of those nights. The rain has not come. Instead, the sky beyond the windows holds a deep, cloudless darkness that seems almost velvety against the glass. Inside the operations room, the lamps glow in their familiar pools of light, illuminating notebooks, folded papers, and the slow movement of pens across pages. You arrive slightly earlier than most of the team. The hallway outside is nearly silent when you walk through it. The sound of your footsteps is softened by the thick carpet, but the emptiness of the building still gives each step a quiet echo. When you open the door, the room greets you the way it always does. Calm, patient, waiting. You set your bag down and turn on the lamps one by one, watching their light gather slowly across the long wooden table. Someone must have left the kettle full earlier in the evening, because when you switch it on, the soft bubbling sound fills the quiet space almost immediately. Steam rises in slow curls toward the ceiling. You pour tea into 2 cups without thinking. You have learned that someone will always arrive grateful for it. A few minutes later, the supervisor enters, shrugging off their coat. They pause when they see the tea already waiting. "Getting ahead of me tonight," they say with a faint smile. You slide the cup across the counter toward them. "Just keeping the room warm." They nod, lifting the mug carefully. Moments like this have become normal now. Small gestures, quiet understanding. Nothing about leadership here feels loud or official. The team arrives gradually. A newer negotiator walks in carrying an armful of folders, setting them down carefully before taking a seat near the edge of the table, the same chair you occupied during your first months. You notice the way they glance around the room, measuring the space, listening. Their shoulders carry a faint tension you remember well. You take the seat closer to the center of the table now, not because anyone told you to, but because that is simply where your work happens these days. The evening briefing unfolds in the same calm rhythm that has always defined these rooms. Voices remain low, sentences thoughtful and unhurried. You speak occasionally, not often, but when you do, the room grows a little quieter. People listen. Not out of obligation, out of trust. You have spent years building that trust in ways no one noticed at the time. Through patience, through steady voices during long nights, through quiet reliability when the hours grew heavy. The younger negotiator watches you carefully during the discussion. You catch their glance once or twice. It reminds you of the way you once studied the senior members of the team during your early shifts, trying to understand how calm could remain so constant in rooms that carried so much responsibility. Eventually, the supervisor finishes the briefing and glances toward you. "You'll take the lead tonight." The words are delivered in the same tone as always. Gentle, matter of fact. The younger negotiator beside you shifts slightly in their chair. You offer them a reassuring nod. Inside the smaller room, the lamp glows softly above the desk as you settle into your seat. The headset rests nearby, its cord coiled loosely beside the stack of notes left from the previous shift. The younger negotiator sits across from you now. Their notebook opens slowly. You notice the way they adjust their pen between their fingers. "First time sitting here?" you ask quietly. They nod. "Yes." You remember that moment, the sense of stepping slightly deeper into the quiet center of the work. You lean back gently in your chair. "It's just another chair," you say. They smile faintly. The call arrives later than usual tonight. For a while, the room sits in patient stillness. The only sounds the occasional rustle of paper and the faint murmur of voices from the main floor beyond the glass. The younger negotiator taps their pen lightly against the notebook. You slide a small note across the desk. "No tapping. Let the room stay quiet." They glance down and immediately still the pen. A few minutes later, the line hums softly through the headset. You lift it slowly, settling the microphone near your mouth. When you speak, your voice enters the conversation the way a calm current enters still water. No abruptness, no effort, just presence. The conversation unfolds gently. You guide it the way experienced negotiators often do, not by pushing forward, but by allowing space to exist where it needs to. Your sentences remain measured, unhurried. You let silence appear between them when necessary. Across the desk, the younger negotiator watches carefully, writing small notes as the minutes stretch into hours. Outside the glass, the rest of the team sits in quiet concentration beneath the lamps. Occasionally, someone rises to refill a cup of tea or stretch their shoulders before returning to the table. The building beyond the room grows deeper in silence. The city outside the windows moves through its own quiet night. Inside the negotiation room, the work continues slowly. At one point, the conversation pauses for a long stretch. Nearly 2 minutes pass without words. The younger negotiator glances toward you. You simply breathe. Steady, patient. Eventually, you slide the headset across the desk toward them. "Your turn." Their eyes widen slightly. They adjust the microphone carefully. When they speak, their voice carries the careful calm of someone walking across unfamiliar ground. You listen, not just to the words, but to the spaces between them, to the rhythm of their breathing, to the tone that shapes each sentence. You do not interrupt, you do not correct. You simply remain present, offering the quiet steadiness that once helped guide you through your own early nights. When they finish, they hand the headset back slowly. "How was that?" they ask. You consider the question. "Steady," you say. They release a small breath. "That silence felt long." You nod. "It always does the first few years." They laugh softly at that. The night continues, the hours pass like gentle tides. Tea grows cold and is replaced. Notes accumulate across the desk. Outside the windows, the darkness eventually begins to soften as dawn approaches. When the call finally ends, the sky beyond the glass carries a pale wash of early light. The younger negotiator leans back in their chair. "I didn't expect it to feel so quiet," they say. You smile. That's the part people don't see. They close their notebook slowly. "Does it always feel like this?" You glance toward the main room, where the team has begun gathering their papers and turning off the lamps. "Most nights," you say. The supervisor opens the door and steps inside. "Good work." Their eyes move between you and the younger negotiator. You see a small hint of pride in their expression. Not loud, just present. You stand and stretch your shoulders. The room behind the glass begins to empty as morning arrives fully outside the windows. Pale sunlight now replaces the warm glow of the desk lamps. Another night has passed quietly through the building. Another long conversation carried gently across the dark hours. As you walk down the hallway with the younger negotiator beside you, they glance over. How long before the silence stops feeling strange? You think about the question. The hallway ahead glows softly with morning light. Eventually, you say, it stops feeling like silence at all. They nod thoughtfully, and you realize that the room, the long nights, and the steady voices have begun teaching them the same lessons they once taught you. Lessons that cannot be rushed. Lessons that unfold only through patience, through listening, through the quiet weight of responsibility carried calmly across many years. The room changes again when your responsibility expands beyond the chair. It happens gradually, the way most changes happen in this building, without ceremony, without any single moment where the air suddenly feels different. One night, you simply realize that your attention no longer rests only on the voice inside the headset. It rests everywhere. Across the table, through the glass, along the quiet edges of the room, where newer team members sit with notebooks open and pens poised, waiting for the long hours to unfold. You arrive earlier than most now. Not because anyone asks you to, because you understand that the room itself needs time to settle before the night begins. The hallway outside the operations floor still carries the faint warmth of late evening when you unlock the door. Most of the building has already gone quiet. The offices along the corridor sit in shadow, their glass walls reflecting the soft glow of overhead lights. Inside the operations room, the air feels still. You place your bag beside the long table and pause for a moment before turning on the lamps. One by one, they bloom into warm circles of light across the wood. The familiar pools of gold spread across notebooks and empty chairs, and the room begins to feel alive again. Not busy, not urgent, just awake. You walk slowly around the table, straightening a few chairs, stacking fresh notepads near the center, placing extra pens where hands will easily find them during the long hours ahead. These small preparations matter more than they might appear. You learned that from those who guided you years ago. A calm room helps create calm people, and calm people carry calm voices into the long conversations of the night. The kettle begins its gentle bubbling as you fill it and set it on the counter. Soon, steam curls upward into the soft light above the sink. By the time the first negotiator arrives, 2 cups of tea are already waiting. They step inside and pause when they see you. "Early again," they say with a tired smile. You shrug lightly, just giving the room a little head start. They laugh quietly and take one of the mugs. Soon, the rest of the team begins to arrive. Coats are draped over chairs, folders open. Pens click softly as notebooks spread across the table. You take your seat near the center, not quite at the head of the table. That position has never suited the quiet culture of this room, but in a place where your voice can reach everyone easily without ever needing to rise. The evening briefing unfolds. You guide it gently, not directing so much as shaping the flow of conversation, allowing each voice to contribute while keeping the atmosphere steady and unhurried. You notice everything now. The way one negotiator rubs their eyes more often than usual. The way another taps their pen when they grow anxious. The way a younger team member sits a little too straight in their chair, carrying the weight of their responsibility too tightly across their shoulders. You make small adjustments, a quiet suggestion, a gentle shift in tone, sometimes simply offering a calm smile across the table. The room responds almost immediately. It always does. Because people in this work learn quickly that emotional steadiness spreads through a space like warmth through water. Once the briefing ends, the team moves naturally into their positions. Two negotiators enter the smaller room behind the glass. Others remain at the table, ready with notes, observations, and quiet support. You stay in the main room tonight. Your role now extends beyond the single conversation. You watch the entire room. The lamps glow softly against the windows, where rain has begun to gather again outside. The droplets slide slowly down the glass, distorting the city lights into soft, shimmering shapes. A junior negotiator sits near the far end of the table, their notebook already half full of careful handwriting. You remember writing like that, trying to capture every detail, trying to understand everything at once. You walk over and set a fresh cup of tea beside them. They look up, slightly startled. "Thank you," they say. You nod. "Pace yourself tonight," you say quietly. They glance down at their pages. "Too many notes?" You smile gently. "Just remember to listen, too." They close the notebook slightly, considering the advice. Across the room, the negotiators inside the smaller office begin their conversation. Their voices drift faintly through the glass. Calm, measured, patient. The rest of the team settles into a steady rhythm. Pens move across paper. Occasional notes slide beneath the glass window toward the negotiators inside. No one rushes. No one raises their voice. You sit back slightly in your chair, watching the room breathe. This has become your work now, protecting the calm atmosphere that allows everyone else to do theirs. The hours move quietly forward. At midnight, the rain grows heavier, drumming softly against the windows. The sound fills the pauses between voices like a slow, steady heartbeat. Someone refills the kettle. Another negotiator stretches their shoulders. You walk a slow circle around the table, checking in with people without interrupting their focus. A few quiet words here. A reassuring nod there. When one of the junior negotiators begins tapping their pen again, the small nervous rhythm returning, you slide a folded note toward them. The message contains only a single word. Breathe. They look up at you, then smile sheepishly before setting the pen down. The room settles again. Inside the negotiation room, the conversation continues its slow path through the night. The negotiators maintain the steady pace you know so well. Voices that never rise, pauses that are never rushed. You feel a quiet pride watching them. Not pride in yourself exactly. Pride in the room. In the culture that has grown here across years of long nights and careful listening. Around 2 a.m, the building outside reaches its deepest stillness. Even the distant sounds of traffic beyond the windows seem to fade. Inside, the lamps glow against the darkness like small islands of warmth. You lean back slightly in your chair, letting your eyes move across the room. Every person here carries responsibility tonight. But your role is to carry a little of it for all of them. If someone grows tired, you notice. If the atmosphere grows tense, you soften it. If the pace begins to drift, you gently guide it back towards steadiness. Leadership here is quiet work. It does not demand attention. It protects calm. Around 3 a.m, the negotiators inside the smaller room pause for a short break. They step out, stretching their backs and rubbing their eyes as they join the rest of the team. You pour them fresh tea without asking. "How's the pace?" one of them asks. You think for a moment. "Good," you say. Room feels steady. They nod, satisfied. The younger negotiator who sat inside earlier approaches the table. "I didn't realize how much the room outside matters," they say quietly. You glance around at the lamps, the notebooks, the calm faces of the team. "It matters a lot," you say. The voice on the line carries the whole room with it. They absorb that thought slowly. Soon they return to their position, and the conversation resumes. The final hours of the night always carry a different energy, not urgency, just the slow awareness that dawn is approaching. Outside the windows, the black sky begins to soften into deep blue. The rain fades to a gentle mist. Inside the operations room, the lamps still glow warmly against the fading darkness. The negotiators speak a little less now. Longer silences appear. You allow them to stretch. Silence, after all these years, feels like a trusted companion. When the call eventually ends, it does so quietly. No sudden moment, just a calm farewell spoken softly through the headset. The negotiators remove their headsets and step back into the main room. The team exhales together, not dramatically, just a shared release of the long night's concentration. "Good work," you say. The words are simple, but they carry the quiet acknowledgement of everything that unfolded across the hours. People begin gathering their papers. Lamps click off one by one. Outside the windows, dawn has fully arrived now, washing the sky in pale gray light. The junior negotiator you spoke with earlier approaches as you gather your notes. "You make it look easy," they say. You shake your head slightly. "It just takes time." They glance back at the room, the empty cups, the scattered papers, the lamps slowly going dark. "How long did it take you?" You pause before answering. The hallway outside the room glows softly with early morning light. "Longer than I realized at the time," you say. They nod. You walk together toward the door, the quiet operations room settling once again into stillness behind you. Another night has passed. Another long stretch of patience carried gently through the dark hours. And as the building begins waking to the sounds of morning offices opening far below, you realize that your work now is not only about the conversations themselves, it is about protecting the calm that makes those conversations possible. Eventually, the room no longer belongs only to the nights you spend inside it. It becomes something larger. Something that stretches across years of quiet conversations, across dozens of times, across the steady passage of people who sit at the same table where you once wrote your first careful notes beneath the glow of a small desk lamp. By the time you begin shaping the work beyond the room itself, the building has already become deeply familiar to you. You know the sound of the hallway lights warming to life in the evening. You know which window carries the softest view of early dawn. You know the faint creak in the third chair from the end of the long table. And you know how the room feels when it is calm. That feeling, the gentle steadiness that spreads through the space like warm light, has become one of the things you now protect. Not just during the long nights, but in the way the team learns, practices, and prepares during the quiet days between them. Tonight, you arrive earlier than anyone else. The building outside is still filled with the low murmur of daytime activity when you step into the corridor, but the upper floor has already begun its gradual transition toward evening quiet. Office doors close one by one. Footsteps fade. Voices grow softer. When you open the operations room door, the lamps are still off. The long table sits in shadow. For a moment, you simply stand there. You remember the first night you ever entered this room. The way the darkness felt heavy with unknown responsibility. The way you hesitated before turning on the lamps. Now your hand reaches for the switches almost automatically. One lamp, then another. Warm light spreads across the wooden table. The room wakes gently. You move slowly around the space, setting out fresh notepads and straightening the stacks of folders that arrived earlier in the day. The kettle is filled and set to heat, and soon the familiar curl of steam begins rising into the quiet air. These small rituals have become part of the culture now. New negotiators arrive and see them already in place, never realizing that years ago someone first decided that warm tea and orderly notebooks could make a long night feel more human. You sit down at the table with a folder of training notes open in front of you. The pages hold observations gathered across many years, not instructions, not formulas, just reflections on patience, tone, and the quiet art of presence. You add another line to the page. Teach them to trust the silence. Your pen rests for a moment afterward. Then you close the folder. Soon the team will arrive. But tonight, before the operational work begins, you will spend some time with the newer negotiators. Training sessions have become part of your role now. Not lectures, not rigid lessons. More like conversations carried gently across the table, the same way real nights unfold. The first person to arrive is a negotiator who joined the unit earlier this year. They step into the room and pause slightly when they see you already seated there. "Evening," they say. "Evening?" They set their bag beside a chair and glance at the training folder in front of you. "Another long night ahead?" You smile. Most of them are. More team members arrive gradually, filling the room with quiet greetings and the soft rustle of notebooks opening. When everyone has settled, you stand and walk slowly around the table before speaking. "We'll spend a little time together before the shift begins," you say. Your voice carries easily across the room without rising. No one feels hurried. That is important. These conversations are meant to feel like the work itself. Calm, reflective, unrushed. You lean lightly against the edge of the table. "When people imagine this profession," you begin, "they often imagine the moment of speaking." A few negotiators nod slightly, but most of the work happens before that moment. Your eyes move slowly around the room. Patience is not something you switch on when the call begins. It's something you carry into the room with you. You notice the younger negotiators writing those words carefully. You continue. The room matters. A few heads lift. The way we sit, the way we speak to each other, the way we allow quiet to exist. You pause. These things shape the voice that eventually goes out into the night. Someone near the far end of the table raises a hand slightly. "How did you learn that?" You smile gently. "Mostly by watching the people who came before me." You glance toward the glass partition where the smaller negotiation room sits waiting. "And by sitting in that chair for many long nights." A few soft smiles move around the table. You walk slowly toward the windows as you speak. Outside, evening has begun settling across the city. The sky glows faintly with the last colors of sunset, and distant lights are beginning to appear along the streets below. "When you're new," you say quietly, "silence feels like something you need to fix." You turn back toward the table. But silence is often where the most important things happen. The room listens. No one interrupts. You continue. You will spend many nights here where the work feels almost invisible. Long stretches where nothing dramatic happens at all. You gesture gently toward the notebooks. And yet those nights matter just as much as the difficult ones. The kettle clicks softly behind you. Someone rises to pour tea for the table. You sit down again. "The goal of this unit," you say, "has never been to create people who speak quickly." You lift your cup. It's to create people who can remain calm for as long as the night asks them to. The words settle across the room. After a moment, one of the younger negotiators asks quietly, "Does that ever get easier?" You think about the question. Through the window, the last light of sunset disappears. "Not exactly," you say, but it becomes familiar. The training conversation continues for nearly an hour. Questions drift across the table. Stories from old nights are shared. Not the dramatic parts people might expect, but the quieter moments that shaped your understanding over time. The long pauses, the steady voices, the soft scratch of pens across paper while the world outside the building slept. Eventually, the supervisor arrives and joins the table. They listen quietly as the final questions fade. Then they nod toward you. Ready to begin? You glance around the room. Everyone looks calm, prepared. The lamps glow warmly. The notebooks wait. Yes, you say. The operational work begins soon afterward. Tonight you remain mostly in the main room again, observing the flow of the team while the negotiators inside the smaller office carry the conversation forward. You watch carefully. Not to correct, to guide. Sometimes you offer a small suggestion written on a slip of paper. Sometimes you simply refill someone's tea. Sometimes your role is nothing more than sitting quietly while the room breathes. And that is enough. The hours stretch gently across the night. Outside, the rain eventually begins again, tapping softly against the windows. Inside, voices remain calm. Pens move, pages turn. Patience fills the space between sentences. When dawn finally begins touching the sky beyond the glass, the call ends quietly as it always does. The team gathers their notes. Chairs slide back. Lamps begin switching off one by one. As people prepare to leave, one of the newer negotiators approaches you. That training tonight helped, they say. You tilt your head slightly. What part? They think for a moment. The silence, they say. You smile. Yes. They glance back at the long table, now scattered with empty cups and half-filled notebooks. I think I understand it a little better now. You gather your own papers slowly. That understanding keeps growing, you say. It never really stops. The hallway outside the room is filled with soft morning light when you step through the door. Behind you, the operations room settles back into quiet stillness. Another night completed. Another group of voices carried patiently across the dark hours. And somewhere in the notebooks scattered across the table, the culture of calm continues passing quietly from one generation of negotiators to the next. There comes a time when the nights begin to feel like chapters rather than shifts. Not because they are less important, but because there have been so many of them. So many long hours spent beneath the same warm desk lamps. So many quiet voices carried across unseen distances. So many early mornings where the sky outside the tall windows slowly turned pale, while the room behind you exhaled the final breath of another night. You still arrive early. Some habits do not fade with time. The hallway lights hum softly above you as you walk toward the operations room, your footsteps moving through the same familiar corridor you have crossed thousands of times before. Most of the offices are dark now, their doors closed, their desks waiting quietly for the people who will return in the morning. You pause outside the door for a moment. Inside, the room waits. When you open it, the stillness greets you like an old friend. The long wooden table sits beneath the dim ceiling lights, its surface clean and ready. The glass partition reflects the faint shapes of chairs and shelves, and the windows along the far wall hold the soft gray of a sky that has not yet decided whether it belongs to evening or night. You set your bag down slowly. Your hands move almost automatically as you turn on the lamps. One by one, they glow to life. Warm circles of light spread across the table. For a moment, you simply stand there, looking at the room. The same room where you once sat with a blank notebook and a pen that hesitated above the page. The same room where you learned how patience could stretch across hours. The same room where you discovered that silence is not empty. It holds weight, memory, responsibility. You pour tea into a small cup and sit down. The steam rises in thin curls before fading into the quiet air. Soon, the team will arrive. You still guide them sometimes, still share thoughts during training. still help shape the steady culture that grew here across decades. But you are also beginning to feel something else now. Distance. Not emotional distance. Perspective. The kind that arrives slowly after years of walking the same long road. You remember so many faces at this table. Some have moved on to other work. Some retired quietly after their own long stretches of night duty. Some still return occasionally, sitting in these same chairs and smiling softly when they hear the familiar sounds of pens moving across paper and kettles warming in the corner. The room carries all of them. You notice that more clearly now. The chair where you once watched your first senior negotiator guide a conversation through an hour of careful silence. The spot near the window where a junior colleague once nervously tapped their pen until you slid them a note that simply said, "Breathe." The glass partition where you stood one early morning, watching dawn rise while the negotiators inside the room spoke in calm, steady tones that seemed to hold the whole night together. Years collect quietly in places like this. You lift your tea and take a slow sip. Outside, the sky darkens fully as night settles across the city. The first team members begin arriving shortly afterward. You hear their footsteps in the hallway before the door opens. They greet you warmly. Some of them have worked beside you for many years. Others joined more recently, bringing fresh notebooks and the same thoughtful curiosity you once carried into the room yourself. The atmosphere gathers slowly. Chairs slide into place. Pens click open. Someone fills the kettle again. The quiet rhythm of the room begins. You watch them, the way they sit, the way they speak, the way they listen to one another before the night has even begun. It comforts you to see that the culture remains intact. Calm, measured, gentle. These things were never written into official instructions. They grew here naturally over time, shaped by hundreds of long nights where patience mattered more than speed and steady voices mattered more than clever words. You join the evening discussion at the table. Your voice remains quiet, offering reflections rather than directives. There is no need to control the room anymore. The room understands itself. You simply help it remember. Later in the night, you walk slowly through the operations floor, while the negotiators inside the smaller room carry the conversation forward. The lamps glow softly. The rain has begun again outside, tapping gently against the windows as it did during so many of your early shifts. A younger negotiator sits near the far end of the table with a notebook open. Their pen moves slowly. You stop beside them. "How's the night treating you?" you ask. They glance up with a small smile. "Quiet," they say. The word makes you smile. "Yes." They hesitate a moment. "I think I'm starting to understand why people stay in this work so long." You tilt your head slightly. "Why do you think that is?" They glance around the room, the warm lamps, the steady voices behind the glass, the quiet concentration of the team. "It feels meaningful," they say softly. You nod. That word has followed this work through every generation. Not dramatic, not heroic, just meaningful. You rest a hand lightly on the back of their chair before continuing your slow walk across the room. Inside the smaller office, the negotiators sit beneath the desk lamp, their voices calm and steady as always. You watch them through the glass for a moment. They do not notice. And that feels right. The work was never meant to be about who is watching. It has always been about presence. The hours stretch gently through the night. You sit occasionally, stand occasionally. Sometimes you simply lean near the window, watching the rain slide slowly down the glass while the voices inside the room continue their careful conversation. You feel a quiet gratitude for all of it, for the nights when nothing dramatic happened at all, for the long stretches of listening, for the shared understanding that patience itself could be a form of care. Eventually, the darkest part of the night begins to fade. A pale gray light appears along the horizon outside the windows. Dawn again. The negotiators inside the smaller room finish their conversation not long after. The headset is set gently on the desk. A quiet farewell travels through the line. Then silence. The team gathers slowly in the main room. Papers are stacked. Notebooks close. Someone switches off the kettle. You look around the table once more. Many of the faces here are younger than yours now. That realization arrives not with sadness, but with a soft sense of completion. The work continues, as it should. A negotiator approaches you near the door while people prepare to leave. "You've spent a lot of years here," they say. You nod. "Yes." They glance back at the room. "Do you ever miss the early days?" You think about that for a moment. The hallway outside glows with the quiet light of morning. "I don't think I ever left them," you say. They look slightly puzzled. You gesture back toward the operations room. Every night here carries a little bit of every other night. They nod slowly, considering that. Soon the team begins stepping out into the hallway, heading toward elevators and quiet morning streets beyond the building. You remain inside the room for a moment longer. The lamps are mostly off now. Only one remains glowing softly at the far end of the table. You walk over and switch it off. The room settles into its final quiet. Outside, the sky has brightened fully. A new day begins. And as you close the door behind you, leaving the long table, the glass partition, and the quiet lamps resting peacefully until the next night arrives, you carry with you the understanding that this work was never about any single moment. It was about the years, the patience, the steady voices, the quiet rooms where responsibility was held gently through the dark until morning came.